Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I am Patrick, and we're taking a pause from our book, What About Evil? We've presented Scott Christensen's Theodicy, and so we figured we'd pause after 3 episodes, give you a break, go back, watch all the short clips, figure out that we probably did a horrible job. You go buy the book, and you realize, oh, that's what he was talking about. So we're kind of give you a breather episode, and I figured we talked theology nerdy. Now I want to bring in all the Star Trek references that I've had, all the time travel, just all the nerdy references that I've had in the episode, and so we're gonna focus them in with, of course, bringing in the Christian worldview and how to approach a good sci-fi fantasy and what to do. And so I'm bringing in my friend from Twitter, who I've just introduced. See, Twitter can be a beautiful place. It brings people together, and so Katie Roome. Yep.
That's correct.
Okay, good. She's the lead writer for Periapsis Press, periapsis.com, and she has an English literature degree and experience as a writing tutor and editor. And so, Katie, thank you for coming on and talking nerdy with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I always feel like when I make the Star Trek references, so I'm a TOS guy, but you know I enjoy my Deep Space Nine, the darker version and stuff like that. So I feel like I might hit like Tony's a group of people that might watch our show, but I feel like I have to be like, okay, Kirk's not just this amalgamation of like a womanizing guy. He's actually a really good captain, and I feel like I'm the last bastion of like my generation that really likes Captain Kirk. So we're going to talk about that. So Periapsis Press, can you kind of tell us what your site is and who your target audience is?
Sure. So Periapsis Press started as kind of a reaction. My husband, David Roome, published, I think it was in 2019, his first book, Uriel's Revenge, and it's a sci-fi book. And we were sort of exposed to indie publishing for the first time and sort of realized that there wasn't a lot out there as far as help for readers in finding good science fiction fantasy to enjoy, and that there was a lot of desire on the part of indie authors to do things to support one another, but there wasn't a lot of time. And reading is my hobby and my passion. I in high school just read everything I could get my hands on, and sort of coming out of college wanted to continue to do productive things with my consumption of so much entertainment. So I was already spending a lot of time reading and wanting to create content with it. And it seemed like this was a good match for me.
So are you primarily writing these reviews for your indie author group of people, or are these reviews that people seeking out good sci-fi fantasy are wanting to come and read?
Primarily focused on readers, so people who are seeking out good sci-fi fantasy. And the reason for that is I see a lot of need for stuff that's focused on readers. A lot of book blogging, a lot of authors' blogs, unfortunately, start to tend towards talking to the people who are the same as them. So other bloggers, other authors, where I wanted to design the website so that it would be easy for readers to find stuff. So I have the long form reviews so that people can really dig in and decide if something's right for them. But then I also have it set up so that it's easy to just browse by the covers in such a way that you know that we recommend the book because we only do positive, and you can do it without getting any spoilers or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, and I like how your site is set up, and it's nice because you can dig into sci-fi or fantasy, and you split those up, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But then you also have what I always have a hard time is people say, oh, what are your like top 3 favorite books? And I always have to be like, okay, we're going to have to talk about like sci-fi, time travel, but like time travel in the future, not time travel in the past. And I really have to like really negotiate my genres of how I'm going to break down my list. It's, like asking my favorite movie. It's like, no, sorry. Like I can tell you what I've liked in the past 6 months, but yeah. So I've like 3 books and they're all sci-fi. So those are my go-to one where I'm not taxing myself or the person who's just making polite conversation, be like, no, come on, just tell me. And I don't really care at this point. So yeah, I like your breakdown. So if I'm looking for kaiju sci-fi, there's a section for that, or weird Western. I really like that. So yeah, that's so yeah, so we're talking about kind of 2 genres, right? Sci-fi, fantasy. And so one of the reasons also to have you on is in Scott Christians's book, What About Evil? He wants to present a meta-narrative overview of not just scripture, but world history, and those two interact with each other. And I've also been listening to J.D. Wilson's Stories Are Soul Food podcast, where he was really looking at kind of a stories and fiction from a Christian worldview. And so I'm getting inundated with a lot of this. So it's stirring up my mind. So what about these 2 genres? Should we separate or should we not? And we're kind of just talking about them as kind of the consumer culture as, and then what either sets them apart or what really defines their ending. So, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. It's a time travel and aliens, but it's kind of not really. And so it's just sometimes hard to define genres, especially right now when people are trying to deconstruct everything and tell anti-hero stories that you don't like the characters and they don't like you as a reader. So I find myself being very neurotic as how I could define these genres if I tried. And I'm all about definitions.
Sure. There's a lot of discussion around that. The way that I approach it is from a reader's perspective, which is, how do I find what I want to read next? Genre splitting is really more of a publishing thing, where it's to help you target your market, to craft reader expectations. So the way that, and it's not perfect, obviously, the way that I have approached it is setting based. So if something is set in space, I say sci-fi straight off the bat. And if it's set in a more traditionally fantasy world, that's when I say fantasy. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between the two, and that's what makes it so hard.
Yeah. I just remember going to Barnes & Nobles and having to always go to the back, no matter what Barnes & Nobles you were at. And Barnes & Nobles was this bookstore that you went to and purchased books. It was a weird concept. And you'd always have to walk all the way in the back, and like you had to share it with like the weird art people, and then we could hang out as a collective of misfits in the back, and it was always walk past the fiction, you walk past your history, and there they were in glorious 2 shelves. You may have gotten 3, which was really nice, but then they added manga to it, and so you kind of lost space in there. And it was always sci-fi and fantasy, and so it's if it could be set in the world of Tolkien, fantasy, but then you brought in other things like wizards with hockey sticks, and you're like, okay, well now it's urban fantasy, but is that sci-fi now because it's in the modern perspective? So it's really hard to fit in, but that's also a good thing because then we have more stories to tell, and we're not having to write there once was a hobbit who lived in a hole type right. Story. Yeah. So I try to use
my genre tags as more of a help for readers than as a hard and fast, like this is a kaiju thriller, as opposed to the mech thriller that didn't have kaiju, but the kaiju also has mechs. So,
if the kaiju has magic, then it's a harder one.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So then, are your authors that you're bringing in, and we're kind of going to talk about from a Christian perspective, are they only Christians? Are they writing for Christian audiences, or is it more your, I guess, your idea is to bring good fiction to a Christian audience, or is just or is it just from your perspective where you're wanting to read just from or recommend from your worldview?
So I think on the About page, I say like stuff that doesn't come into conflict with our Christian worldview. And like, that's pretty open. So the authors and their stories don't have to be Christian. We have stories by people, I have no idea, what their religious views are. I try to pick Christian authors when I can, but sometimes it's just whatever catches my eye, and then I read it and I decide. I really feel that the idea that all stories point back to God's story is a legitimate one. So I don't feel that the stories or the authors have to be Christian per se, because they're going to point back to God if they are good stories. That being said, we do try to pick stories that have thematic messages that are in line with what we believe. Not necessarily just about God, but about like our whole worldview in general. I think that really opens up a nice diversity of like thematic stuff too, because you get authors who are Christian who don't feel like they have to be preaching. We have Paul Thompson's Drosselmeyer, right? He's got this great focus on a social issue. And then I've got people like TJ Marquis's Heroes Metal stuff, where he tackles the sovereignty of God, right? So they run the gambit of interesting topics, but their stories aren't about those things. They just have those as underlying messages.
Gotcha. Yeah. So in your About page, you say, we are focusing our works on science fiction and fantasy with themes and values that do not come in conflict with our Christian worldview. And so you're writing from a negative perspective there, and from people that read confessions and statements of faith, and we can nuance that up and down. But so what does the Christian worldview have to do with things that we read and write? Why can't I just sit down with a book and just open it and go on? And if it's bad, I can go, oh, I didn't like this, or ooh, there's some icky words in here, and I can just brush past them and be fine with them. So what about our Christian worldview should inform both the things that we read and write?
Well, that's tough. I think that where we're coming at it from Periapsis Press, at least, is that we don't have to be preaching as authors in our books to be making a difference. But at the same time, we want to be presenting stories and ideas that make people reflect a bit, to turn towards God's story. we want to be a good witness in that sense. As far as reading and consuming media, I think it's important that we are putting truth into our minds, even if it's not like the Bible, right? We want to be putting the Bible into our minds, obviously, but with our entertainment, we want to be consuming a narrative that is going to influence us positively. So not just with values, but with how we understand the world to work, particularly things like themes like redemption and forgiveness and things that would help us to have a Christ perspective in that sense, even if it's got a few icky words.
Yeah. Scott Christensen's book that we're reading, and I'm sure he's pulling from other places too, but he does a really good job. He talks about stories that are the tragedies and comedies. So everything is a good story is boiled down to the tragedies, meaning at the end of Hamlet, everyone dies, and the theme that's supposed to be taken away is this is what vengeance causes: death in the soul, death in the physical characters, death in the family, death in the fabric of society, and so we see the need for justice and judgment to come in there. Or comedy is the redemption story arc, and what better example can I point to than the death and resurrection of Christ? It comes down as a tragedy. People are hiding away. The knocks at the door and they're scared. Only the women are brave enough to venture out, and then they come back and bring forth the good news of the comedy of why are you hiding? Why are you here in this locked room? Go and go see that death is overcome. That's the biggest comedy right there. Is everything. The tiny village of Bethlehem, a servant leader, someone not of the priestly line, not of society, and Rome is still standing at the end. Like that's the almost the comedy of errors of our thinking process. And so Or I always think back to Richard Dawkins always has like this critique of the story of Lot, where he goes in and you have the strangers come in and the village shows up and they want to do all the nefarious things to his visitors, and he throws out, well, take my daughters, and he says, well, that's just evil, that's wrong. Yeah, that's the point of the story, is Lot is in the mix with these people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we have to realize that he's at the precipice of the gate. He's welcoming people. He's probably a leader. And it's not really until like the New Testament that we find out that Lot is saved. And we're waiting until Hebrews 11 to where we can to figure out the kind of the God eye perspective of Lot's ending. And so it's seeing things like offering up daughters to be sacrificed to the crowd. That's a bad thing. Or Jesus telling stories of wrong judges that are just so annoyed by somebody that they give justice, and so he compares even God to this bad judge to make this story point. And so he's telling that in stories, and so that's what we can see being made in the image of God, and we see from a Christian perspective. As you were saying, that a lot of these stories, when they reflect reality, even though we're talking about going up in space and aliens and giant monsters with squishy parts, or sci-fi with plasma cannons, we're still in order for us to read that, we have to have a touchstone, and that's usually reality. So like Harry Potter. For all the evil magic that's in there, we we understand like the kid in the closet who's ostracized. Well, I think it touched a lot of people because there's a lot of people that read books like Harry Potter who are ostracized underneath the stairs. And, I spent most of my time reading Ender's Game for my college introduction. And I'm like, I'm really in a good book right now. So as long as I'm not signing up for classes, I'm going along with Ender, and I'm trying to defeat the aliens. And then I realize I might be the monster. Like that's an amazing point that I can touch back on and say, okay, from a Christian perspective, as I'm going to filter everything through, because that's my basis for reality, my basis for knowledge, my basis for concepts of justice or goodness. I can have a point reference where that story has both a tragedy and maybe a comedy aspect, or only a tragedy. And so that's what I like about sci-fi, is that it presents new settings where we can talk about it. And I always go back to Star Trek episodes where it's like, yeah, they're set in space and there's silly creatures with plastic, and you've got really bad fight scenes. But does war have to take place where destruction and violence happens, and then there's a lottery system that comes in, and you're having society be the protected, but then the people are just in the way, and so you're protecting society. And at the end, spoilers, is that Kirk launches missiles and destruction happens, and he says, no, war has to be violent because humanity has to hate war. It can't be blasé about death and killing. It can't be this lottery system where they bring stuff in. I really like those stories that really kind of challenge the ideas of like, oh, well, is Kirk the bad guy in that? Because, I mean, he just launched a bunch of missiles at works of art that have been preserved for thousands of years, and he comes in and it was the Prime Directive violated and stuff like that. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on and talk about this stuff is because I'm getting new information on just how to read things and not just consume things. So it's really I have a lot to say that I'm at this point rambling, and I'm sure this is like 3 audience members that are going to watch it.
I agree that sci-fi and fantasy, they make a good vehicle for exploring themes in a deeper way, maybe because you get caught up in the descriptions and the cool factor of what all these characters are doing. But then because you're not bound by actual history or actual reality, there aren't things that intrude. For example, I know that there have been comments on books that were set in 2020 before all of the pandemic stuff hit, and people just get completely taken out of the story because they're like, this didn't happen.
Yeah.
But with sci-fi and fantasy, you're able to set things up the way that you as an author want them. And as a reader, you're able to explore, through exploring a new world, different ideas that you might not come across in your everyday life.
Yeah. One of my favorite books, if you were to ask me, like one of my top 3 books, is H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. There's not a lot. So, Martians come down and destroy the world type deal. What I like is the cast of characters that you meet. You don't really meet a whole lot, but who you do is like, he's a reporter. Then you meet the partisan. So I might be pulling from the musical version because I like all things War of the Worlds. So Brother Nathaniel. So you have a priest there. Then you have the artilleryman who comes in, and he has grand ideas, but not the fortitude to carry them out. Type deal. And then you have a love interest, and then throughout the Martians are there, and they seem just a force of nature. And so the ideas of thinking about society and the big things like the military or society or how people would react to that and what good can come from that. And of course we're reading it from Wells's perspective, who probably isn't the top-notch Christian that I want him to be, especially what he did later in life. But is the religious sect, are they helpful in this situation? And then what's the big takeaway is through our military might, our society, our structures, our organization, it's all taken away from us. And what defeats the ultimate bad guy is the thing that you can't see. It's the thing that they came for and it killed them. And so it's the blankness at the end. It's not and on this day we shall declare our Independence Day. There's no speech like that. Although I love that speech, but there's just death and disease and destruction, and then society pops out and goes, okay, what now? And so I really like, even from a not Christian story, that group of characters, that message is something that is really interesting to think about. Once you do your one read and you're like, oh, cool, Martians, destruction, 1800s, this is really neat. And what does this say about war to us? And that's your kind of second read through, and those stories that stay with you, and you read over again and you realize, oh, there's more than I can get out of this other than pew pew and aliens, which is fun,
Oh, yeah. That's why we read sci-fi and fantasy, is because it's fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing that we're trying to promote with Periapsis Press, is that we can have these values and themes and worldviews without it being boring or awkward, like general Christian fiction has to have a conversion scene.
And all the women have to be Amish for some odd reason. Sorry, go ahead. I've got a joke in there about my Amish Christian fiction, so I won't take it.
But sci-fi fantasy, you're free from that because there's other genre tropes that you're hitting that tend to be less restrictive, so you can present this sort of thing without being awkward and boring.
Yeah, not everything needs the atheist who doesn't curse to either die or come to saving faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Not that we wouldn't want that, but that's not how all stories work. That's the touchstone again is reality. Like you have to describe an alien that is different, or you set that up for later. You're like, oh, we were the aliens all along, type deal. So there's got to be a glimmer of relationship. You wouldn't be able to write it apart from the human experience, which is ultimately God's story of a fallen world. And there's violence and sex in the world. There's people that might not agree with us. There are people that hear the gospel message and might choose to further go on the path of destruction. And if everyone comes to the gospel message every single time, and you're just reading, and then everyone lived happily ever after, it's that Twilight Zone episode that I think I've referenced a number of times, where the guy is always winning the car games, and he's always getting everything he wants, and he realizes that he's just going to live a life of boringness in heaven. And he goes to the man and goes, I need some variety here in heaven. I thought this was paradise. And he's like, oh, who said this was heaven? And you're like, oh, this is mind blown. So yeah. In your about page, you say we created Periapsis Press to promote our own work and work of others. Very selfish of you, by the way. Primarily through positive long-form articles, including reviews and thoughtful interviews that cater to readers. So long-form reviews tend to focus on kind of just writing craft, how to write a book, or what words should we stop using. So more focused on the author perspective there, which alienates readers because we don't understand the craft. I like a book, but it's like classical music. I like classical music. But people are like, oh, here's where the War of 1812 really comes into play on this second stanza. And I'm like, I don't, it's not even a foreign language. Like I know some Klingon, and I understand Klingon better than I understand, classical music. So we don't understand all the things that go into writing it because we've only been on one side, not on the other, or the reviews are only written kind of by non-authors. So you're the bridge. You're the authors that can write, and then you're the readers that can bring us along. So why positive reviews? That's not how you get clicks. You get clicks by bashing everything. Everything is deconstructed. You can't like anything before, I think 6 months ago, maybe. Everything else before that's problematic or not inclusive. Why positive reviews?
Again, it goes back to serving readers. It's my firm belief that negative reviews don't help anybody. I should say blog reviews. Negative reviews on Amazon can be helpful for like, okay, this book I shouldn't buy. But if you are running a review website and you say, this book was 2 out of 5 stars, or even 3 out of 5 stars, that doesn't help me to decide what to read. It just tells me, okay, you didn't like this one, so maybe I should avoid this one. And I don't really need to do any more reading other than the 2 out of 5 stars. And negative stuff in general gets more clicks, but I wouldn't say that it necessarily gets more like shares. I get a lot of people on Twitter who really appreciate being able to share something positive. Like everybody can come up with something where somebody makes a stupid comment or is political, so they can, everyone can come up with something like that and share other people's stuff like that. But I think people really are looking for more just feed refresh type stuff.
Okay.
But like I said, my focus is mostly on the reader's perspective. I really want people to be able to go on the site and say everything on here is something that meets a certain level of quality and content, and I can jump in without necessarily reading the entire long form review.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you parse it as like the Amazon or I've really enjoyed more like Goodreads because it highlights your friends on there that you would be most likely to recommend, and I like that they put it at the top. So I tend to go there, especially for theology stuff. If I curtail, if I know enough people, which is very hard these days, for us nerdy people that want to stay with books rather than online. Finding the negative review, okay, maybe put that in the to read section, but not right now section. But one of the things that I like about to build you up well is I've read enough of your reviews, excuse me, where you put the about page or the synopsis in there, and then I can tell from that the very fact that it's on there is that you've enjoyed it. And so if it sounds interesting, I'll stop because I've read enough of your other reviews where I'm like, I don't really care too much about like the cowboy saga with where there's cowboys and aliens or
Sure.
something along those lines. I like man with no name type stuff where he has to become the sheriff, but maybe he's not a good sheriff type deal. So I know to stop reading your review and then go read the book and then come back. So like Drosselmeyer of Paul Anderson, I've not read your review of his because it's sitting there in my Audible playlist that I'm going to read next, and then I'll go back and go, all right, what did you get wrong that I of course the better of all things me have curtailed.
Well, be sure to comment and let me know what I got wrong.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, I'm trying to be a good reader. I'm trying to, my negative reviews are going to be there to warn people. This is some of the most awful characters. I've put them out there on Goodreads, and I'm shocked of the people that can read annoying characters for 200 pages, or British literature, where you've got me at Magic in the Napoleonic Wars. I buy the omnibus that is 3 volumes. I'm halfway. What I think I'm halfway through the first volume. I go and look, and I'm halfway into the second volume, and I don't understand how this has a TV deal. I don't understand. Oh, well, you just don't understand British lit. Yeah, but I understand good literature, and I can't believe someone has stopped at book 1 and continued for 2 more books, and nothing has happened other than water ships. You promised me Magic and the Napoleonic Wars. I'm sorry, flashbacks. I'm trying not to be too negative. So I want to be a good reviewer from a reader's perspective. What can I focus on other than to say this was good, I liked it? What should I stay away from other than saying good, enjoyed, I liked it? What are some themes, or what are some touch points that I can include in my reviews to help people in a positive way?
As far as Amazon reviews, short reviews on Goodreads, stuff like that, I liked it is enough for sure.
Because no one really cares. They're just seeing the 1 stars and the 5 stars.
Yeah.
So Ernest Cline, Ready Player One, I'm okay with it at 2, and I've gotten more negative reviews on Goodreads about my Ready Player One, and then all of a sudden, after the second book comes out, all those people seem to also agree with me all of a sudden that it wasn't a good book.
Things that I try to do with my longer reviews and reviews on other bloggers' sites that I appreciate is to sort of break down why I liked it. So if a book has a particularly engaging character, I try to talk about that. Sometimes the setting is just there, and sometimes it's really, really interesting, and so I want to dig into it. I think The Devil's Dictum, Frederick Heimbach, I think is how you say it. That was like, the setting just was amazing. It's just an alternate history type America, but founded by pirates instead of pilgrims. You know, so
nice. See, I'm sold. I'm sold on that. But you need to introduce pirates into America, not 2 books in.
Right. So I try and unearth why I like something, and I think that is difficult for people because it's so much easier to talk about why something is bad. It comes easily. But to talk about, well, what makes this a good book is a little more complicated and a little more nuanced for each individual reader.
Gotcha. Also on your About page, you say, I'm kind of pulling these out of order because this is the way I want to talk about them, not how you want to talk about them.
That's all right.
You say, second, what commentary does exist is largely focused on negative aspects of traditional media rather than positive qualities of indie fiction. Okay, I as a reader, I can kind of see, well, you're an indie author. You don't have the New York Times bestseller, maybe, unless if you're already popular. You may not have, unless if you built up a giant audience, you're not going to be able to put up a splash page and just sell to your readers. So what are the struggles that indie authors have? And I guess do the books that you read, the Christian indie authors, or people that you want to focus on, what I guess further struggles or what additional struggles might they have?
Sure. Marketing is the big one, I think, because with traditional media, there is a a platform already there. There is a guarantee you're going to have physical copies in physical bookstores, which has been less important the last couple of years. But what is a major factor in grabbing browsers? People who are walking through the store and they see your nice book with your nice cover right there on the shelf next to Tolkien or whoever, there's a support system there that goes deeper and grabs people who are casual. And I think probably the biggest problem for indies is it's very, very difficult to show up in searches because there's just so much crap,
right.
Erotica and that genre just crowds everything out in fantasy sci-fi because people buy that, and then your book gets shuffled farther down. And then there's just poor quality stuff because it's so accessible. People who want to be writers and don't have either the resources or the inclination to get an editor or don't have their own ability to pick out like odd wording and stuff and poor formatting. All of those things contribute to what people call a stigma against indie authors. It's really not a stigma against indie authors or self-publishing so much as it is just
the truth. The barrier of entry. It's like Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. We wouldn't be hearing from us. We definitely wouldn't be hearing from the fringer people, but everyone has the same platform. Everyone has a voice. And sometimes that's not always the best.
Right. Right.
Especially as a consumer.
Yeah. So the problems with traditional media is the gatekeeping on the other hand. So on the one, like the indie publishing, there's nothing that's keeping whoever wants to, even if they have just like a third grade level, like in English, publish their book. With traditional media, the gatekeeping is there, and it guarantees a level of quality because their editors have done the work making sure everything's polished, and they have their cover artists and everything looks great, but the problem is twofold. One is that they gatekeep stuff out, like Christian worldviews, books that have explicitly Christian characters. There's not a lot of indie books. They don't fit perfectly in a genre that would then be marketable, so they wouldn't be chosen.
Yeah.
The other is that they polish out a lot of the interesting elements of stuff. One thing when I first started reading more indie literature was that I realized that the story beats didn't always land the way that I expected them to from reading traditional media. There is a sense in which traditionally published books have been pre-chewed for you, and you are just eating paste. It goes down very, very smoothly, but a lot of the interesting elements have been scrubbed out as a result as well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'll have to go back to Ernest Cline's second novel, where you saw the audience speak to him, and then he wrote that book, and the worst parts of the first book came out more, and so there's more a focus of, well, why aren't there this many number of representations? And he was like, oh, okay, I'll put that in there, and everything seems so washed over, and the problematic portions that made his character the spunky young kid that's just the author in an 18-year-old body, set in the future of this world, came out. Like, I could get past he's an atheist and he really hates every Christian except for the old lady that gives him food underneath him. But it became even worse because that's what has been, the message has been preached from on high, and that's what it must conform to. Yeah. So you lose he was maybe an interesting character, who did feats unhuman, like memorizing fleets of fiction that no one could ever possibly do, no matter if you had $1 billion or not. But, yeah. So I just had a lot of problems with that book. So then what then are the positive aspects? Why? So I understand I might have to spend a couple bucks on an editor. What are the positive aspects that I can have becoming an indie author, or being able to share my message of the Lord Jesus Christ with Martians from the year 6000?
So there's a lot of freedom and creative control, for sure. If you have a story like that, you're going to have trouble getting it in front of readers because of the heavy gatekeeping and in traditional media. So if you are willing to put in the work, and there is more work as an author, but you can have that pure creativity that has not been filed down or scrubbed out, and put that in front of people. And you can also have a more personal connection with some of your readers. A lot of people because they're in charge of their own marketing, are able to have relationships with people who like the same things they do, right? Because they are presenting a project they have worked on that you have to like what you're doing. So there's more support there, I feel. And of course there's middle grounds too, right? There's small publishers whose values are going to align more with yours and stuff like that. So I think probably the biggest thing is the creative control for at least this group that we're talking about, because like a traditional Christian publisher is going to push for what they see as their reader expectations as far as Christian books. Mm. And
so that's interesting. That's even a gatekeeping aspect that will harm authors and readers, because there's a sense where they know their audience, and so I want to publish with Zondervan. I think good or bad about Zondervan, but maybe they won't take this message of positive husband and wife relationships in a book where, hey, guess what? When people are married, things might happen where they might not always fight and get divorced. There might be some positive aspects to it.
Yeah.
Not anything specifically I'm reading. I'm just not anything against Zondervan.
Right. Well, and it sort of goes back to that diversity of thematic expression too, because when you have a Christian publisher, they're looking for specific messages too, specific types of characters. They want a certain level of of romance, say, that appeals to their group. If you are a Christian author and say you have a sex scene that is important to the story and important to the thematic message, they might not touch it, even though you're not promoting a heinous lifestyle using that scene. If you
descriptive over titillating,
right.
Yeah.
If you have that kind of content, it might be difficult to get that published at all, because you have both the Christian characters, Christian worldview, and an unsavory bit that maybe people would rather not.
Yeah. One of the things that I think too, just comparing and contrasting, is, and I think it was a couple years ago, and it was either like the Neptune Awards or the Hugo Awards or something like that. I feel like more traditional, current traditional sci-fi routes or fantasy, I feel a lot of hatred from the author as a reader against me, and as a white male, I am definitely the most persecuted of all peoples. But I just feel like I'm reading an author who hates me rather than someone who wants to tell me a story. And from that award show, a gal was given the best author or whatever, and she spent the majority of her time complaining about how no one like her could get into the industry that she is, and she couldn't get her stuff published, and no one that looked like her was able to rise to the level as she's receiving an award. It was dissonance, cognitive dissonance right there. But I feel like, at least if I'm reading a bad indie book, which I've exchanged reviews for, like Audible credits. So I'm trying to do my part for the indie crowd, and I'm trying not to be too negative. Is that they're at least writing a story for me to read rather than I want them to beat me over the head with a message, but I want it to be their message that they are free to write, not the pasty message.
Yes. And I think indie authors tend to be freer to do that. There is a real sense that these people, these authors are not looking to have a platform for their particular victimhood, but are looking to share an entertaining story, even if it's the sort of gimmicky, like Adam Lane Smith has a book called Burrito Avenger. Like, they're just fun, right? Like, people want things to be fun. And if there is a thematic message to the story, then people aren't going to get to it if the story isn't entertaining.
In your About page, you say that it can be difficult for readers to find good books with science fiction fantasy genres due to muddled search results from Amazon Goodreads lists that always feature the same popular books, and book blogs that that post more about the big pile of books to read, the reading challenges, than actual books that they enjoyed. With indie fiction, so with Christian fiction, I appreciate the Amish women folk on the cover, because I know never to read any of those books ever. I appreciate that. So I want to read Christian fiction. I want a gospel message mixed in there, and even maybe I want to read a romance film or a novel. I'm okay with that. I'm a 21st century man's man who wants to cry at a good love scene, but I never want to read anything because it just seems like it's oversaturated garbage that you couldn't. I don't know what story you could get out of that where all those books have to exist. Okay, so that's my knock against Christian fiction in general. But indie fiction seems to lie by either cover or description. So they usually have a great cover, but their story is garbage, or it's an MS Paint cover with a description that sounds really good, but that barrier for entry is I have to with the barrier for entry for any indie film, any indie book, I have to judge a book by its cover and the description that author is coming up with. It's not a third party publisher that's like, here's the things that will enrapture your imagination as you read this. So I get stuck on relying either of those two. What can I do? How can I best, other than to go to Periapsis Press? But you haven't read everything, unfortunately. I'm very disappointed in you. How dare you have children and a life? But I appreciate the ones that you do have on there, because even the ones that I don't want to read, I've enjoyed. I'm going to build you up. I've enjoyed reading every review that you posted because you take it from my perspective of, okay, I might not like gambling, but I understand people who enjoy gambling. I might not like people that read urban fantasy, but I appreciate people that enjoy that. So, they're like my people. I have to enjoy it. But what can I do when I come to the sea of covers and I have to pick one, the MS Paint one with the story that sounds good, but I don't see the effort you put into the cover. But also that cover I've seen on Pixabay, and I'm pretty sure you've gotten your font just perfect, and I'm scared. Like your husband has a brilliant cover and a brilliant description. I'm definitely going to check out his books because they're so good, and I've read your stuff, so I'm assuming that you've had maybe a small hand in helping him out.
Well, thank you. I'll pass along the compliment. Yeah. It's a tough one for sure, because covers cost money. So an author with a good cover has spent the money to get it, or has been blessed with the time and ability to craft it themselves. But you don't want to dismiss out of hand a good book just because it has a bad cover.
Yeah, totally. I put all my reviews on Goodreads. I'll put my links. Mine are non-spoiler, and I try and do positive and maybe one negative to say like, I didn't really like this. But all the books that I've ever read for the audiobook group that I'm a part of, I've been honest, and I've understood where they're coming from as authors, as people.
Yeah, and I think that is the key, is reviews, which again is one of the things that all of my indie author friends harp on. They're always begging people to leave reviews, but that's how you decide between the book with the great cover and the suboptimal blurb, or the great blurb with the suboptimal cover, is you check out the reviews and you see people who say, oh, this is a really good book, or like, I couldn't read past page 2. So I would say there's nothing you can really do about picking and choosing without those. So to be intentional as a reader about going back once you have finished with a book, whether that's on page 2 or the end, and leaving your review really helps other readers make that decision.
Gotcha. Okay. So there is a place for the short reviews from plebes like myself who are okay using the words, I like this, yes, and I didn't like this. Okay, good. I still have a job. Okay, so kind of coming down to the end of our interview here, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. Thank you for letting me talk at you, and hopefully you've gotten a few words in edgewise. I don't know if this is proper of me, but could you tell me some of your favorite books that you've reviewed that we should go check out?
Oh,
Or is that not proper? And you just want to tell me your top 3 favorite time travel movies that are set in the future where they go back in time, but not so far back in time where dinosaurs exist. So
it's hard because I do like all of the books that I've reviewed.
perfect.
Probably some of the ones that I've actually mentioned because they stick in my head, right? Obviously, I did like my husband's books. So
Well, good. All right. Now that he's left the room, now you can say they were fine.
So that would be Uriel's Revenge and The Fountain Mechanism, which is the sequel. And those are science fiction, a little bit harder as far as the mechanisms, the mechanics of how stuff works. Space with demons is one of the things he says.
Sold, right? Yeah.
The Devil's Dictum. I really liked that one. That's the Pirates Founding America one.
It's already on the list.
T.J. Marquis' stuff, his Heroes Metal series, he just released his sequel. They are inspired by heavy metal music, so they have a real push and drive to them. There's so many good ones.
Definitely go to Periapsis Press, and if you see a book, you might not have fully agreed with everything, but coming from your perspective, a Christian worldview, you've filtered it in, you've understood that all stories are God's stories, even the ones that we don't like reflect the nature of the author or the nature of humanity. Hopefully, that's what we're bringing in. Even with poetry, we're trying to market a feeling in the words that we use. But the ones that are on that page, you've enjoyed and found to be of worth and benefit for not only our money, because what's $6 when you have a good book. I bought Ender's Game for $3 and that thing fell apart. I've read it so many times. But also our time. And so I can watch bad movies. I love bad movies. It can't be boring, right? Like it has to be the worst, like bad sci-fi, bad acting. Love it. I can do that. I can't do that with a book because I feel like that's time that I put in, not just reading the page, but I want to be there. And I just read a really good book on reading called The Lost Art of Reading or something like that. I just put a review out. I'll link it here as well, where they say a good book lets you escape, but it doesn't lead to escapism. So like Harry Potter, I don't want to live in that world. And I've not read Harry Potter. I don't really care. It's just who I am. But there are people that want to live in that world to the point where it becomes obsession. But then there are people that enjoy that. And we could even say that about Tolkien. I'm not saying the devil's going to take you if you read Harry Potter, but I guess it's okay when Tolkien and Lewis do it. But that's another inside baseball Christian fiction story. But that we're wanting to put ourselves in that story and use our imagination, which seems like a more daunting task than images being projected on a screen where I tend to be more passive and I can check my phone. I can't do that when I'm reading my book.
Yeah, reading is a more time-heavy investment, and not just of time, but of mental energy, and which they've been telling me since I was a kid. You should go read a book instead of watching the TV all the time. Yeah. But with a book, it's easy to invest a large amount of your time before you realize that something's not going anywhere, or it's going somewhere that you don't agree with or want to go along with. Yeah.
And at the 18th reading of Hop on Pop, it's nice to pick up something where time travelers from the future come and give AK-47s to the Confederacy, and I have to throw the book at the description of them on the White House lawn, and Abraham Lincoln has to surrender. if I throw the book, it took me so that's Harry Turtledove's Guns of the South. I threw the book and I was like, if it made me react that strongly, I have to finish it. So yeah. But he has some other good ones, and that's my path of alternate fiction is aliens during World War II. Tell me no more. Give me the first book. You know, I'm there. So Pirates in America. Totally. Demons in Space. I mean, absolutely. So, well, Katie, thank you very, very much for indulging me and talking sci-fi with me. I feel connected. I don't feel ostracized. I'm not under the stairs. Well, I mean, I guess technically I am because I'm in my basement, but I appreciate other people that enjoy the genres as much as I do. So thank you. And Periapsis Press, I'll get to all your other reviews as soon as you stop recommending really good books, and I can finish your reviews and that.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll continue back with our book and figure out what place evil has, and maybe as you're reading your next fiction book, you can have a good touch point on why so many people seem to focus on evil, violence, sex in their fiction. It's because all stories are ultimately God stories. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.